Why is it that every so often you get these voices inside of your head telling you you're not good enough, you don't deserve to be here,
you have to prove yourself,
good luck not getting
don't embarrass
fired,
yourself,
everyone is going to find out
you're
the
not
truth.
fooling anyone.
If you felt any of these feelings of self-doubt, then stick around because today in this video, I'm going to be talking about this insecurity cycle called imposter syndrome. By the end of this video, you're going to have a completely different mindset and hopefully some new tools to rely on if you ever feel like imposter syndrome is creeping in. When I experience imposter syndrome, it usually rears its ugly head when I am in a period of transition. And because of that, I realized that the trigger really was comparison. Before really big transition periods, I would live peacefully for like months or years with the same type of people surrounding me, whether that may be colleagues or coworkers or students. And when that big transition period came, those types of people changed. It was a whole new set of people that I had never met or got to know before. And then I would start comparing my skills to these new people, resulting in me fearing that everyone around me would start doubting my own skills. So really, comparison is the true grim reaper of confidence. So my advice here is to stop comparing yourself to others. Sometimes when people say this, I get a little irked because that is so much easier said than done. As humans, we literally cannot help the fact that we compare ourselves to others, especially when we've never met them before and we don't know their entire picture and story. So instead, let's do this. Let's focus on yourself. Instead of sizing up everyone else's strengths and talents and skills, it's so much more important to focus on your own strengths and talents and skills. Okay, so when I was newer in my career, I was comparing myself to another designer who created this amazingly, insanely good logo. And I was feeling really inadequate. But it is not logical to compare myself to someone who doesn't have the same situation as I do. Because this designer could have gone to graphic design school for a number of years, which I haven't. This designer could have been practicing outside of work, which I don't. Or this designer could have a really good graphic design mentor that I don't have. So I just cannot compare apples to apples when our situations are so different. And I especially cannot compare my beginning to someone else's middle. Over time, I've definitely learned that comparing myself to others only makes me bitter, but trying to compete with myself and trying to improve myself from who I was yesterday is actually going to make me better. So the most important takeaway here is to write out everything that you know you're good at. So here's an example. I genuinely believe that I'm a good storyteller, whether that may be here on YouTube or through my writing or even through a presentation. And I knew that to my core. Like, I knew I could stand by my storytelling and my writing. So when I was going through a UX design interview process and I had to present a portfolio, I stood by it being like, I am so proud of this that if another candidate ends up beating me over this presentation, honestly, I have so much respect for that person because if they were so good that they beat my presentation that I know is so good, then honestly, respect, like, good on them. So by really tuning in and grounding yourself and understanding what you're good at and what you genuinely know you're so proud of, the goal here is not to compare ourselves to others, but instead be inspired by other people's success. And speaking of interviews, honestly, interviewing for a job is like the ultimate test for your self-confidence because you're constantly and voluntarily putting yourself up to be judged, and yeah, it's not fun. But rejection honestly needs to be seen as growth. Again, easier said than done, but for me, it's like very much little baby steps. For example, there was a time when I was interviewing and there's like a panel of 4 people, and one of them in particular was very much talking down to me, cough cough, it was a man. So basically mansplaining. It was very condescending and honestly a little bit embarrassing for me because being the one who was being interviewed, there was 4 other people, one of them basically berating me, and the other 3 just kind of standing there. And I left the interview immediately feeling like I failed the interview. Like, there was no way I was going to get the job after that experience because it was my fault. I think it's because I'm a woman and this is just innate to me at this point. I took it and very much internalized it. And it did take me a couple days to like really sassy hype myself up and be like, no, this is not my fault. And I started thinking like, why would I want to work somewhere that allowed this type of behavior? Like full on like, no, honey, I am not playing this game. And so I immediately told that company that I was withdrawing my candidacy. And I took that moment as more of like a token to add on to my self-confidence rather than letting it really suck me into a moment of failure. It is so important to remind yourself that nothing is worth compromising yourself. Which also leads me to reminding yourself all about the risks of imposter syndrome. When I'm feeling inadequate, I convince myself that what I have to say literally doesn't matter. So when I start doubting my successes or I'm pushing it to luck and I'm like, well, I must have just gotten lucky to get here. It's not actually because of my skills and it's not actually because I worked really hard. It hinders me from getting like promotions, or the worst is actually not being able to do your job at all. When you're so overwhelmed by this feeling of insecurity and self-doubt, it's really easy not to speak up. I've definitely found myself when I'm newer in my career or I'm at like a new job, I didn't really speak up and ask questions because I was like, they're gonna come off as so stupid. So I would sit with them and try and figure them out on my own. And that was definitely one of those like learning moments that like kicked me in the butt, because when I try to figure things out on my own, I typically made mistakes. And then when I make mistakes, I'm back into that cycle of like, wow, I knew I didn't deserve to be here. I didn't do a good job. Like I can't even do my job correctly. Why did they hire me? They're probably going to fire me. And then you're stuck in that same loop all over again. The worst part too is that this doesn't only affect me, but it affects other people. Being a designer, I've learned over the years that junior roles really do rely on seniors to pave the way for confidence. If I didn't meet a specific senior designer that I met a while ago, I have no idea where I would be in my career, and I probably wouldn't be as outspoken as I am today. She would constantly say out loud in front of groups that she didn't know something, or she would openly admit that she had no idea how to do something that was considered a design basic, and she just owned it. And because of her, she fostered this type of culture amongst other designers to constantly ask questions about things publicly and not be ashamed to even say them in like big, large groups. And it just created such a special group of designers that was willing to share, and not once did anyone feel like they were inadequate because of the questions that they asked. It is so important, honestly, especially for women, to continue to foster that type of environment where it is okay to admit things. It is okay to want to know more. It is okay if someone knows something and you don't. So for me, when it comes to imposter syndrome, I honestly sit with it for a little bit. I let it roll in and I reflect on it. I don't immediately try and push it away and panic and try to make it go away and suppress it, because I know I have these tools and pillars to always anchor myself back on. And those are the things that we talked about early in this video, like recognizing your strengths, knowing that you can't always compare yourself to others because everyone's situation is different, finding that strength to speak up, not just for yourself, but for others too, and reframing failures as moments of growth and reflection. Lastly, I do want to point out, although all of these tools are really great, effective ways of handling imposter syndrome, they are not a cure-all, especially because we have to take into consideration societal inequalities and privilege that can influence the opportunities that are given. And just remember that it's absolutely normal to feel these feelings. Like, we are only human, we are not perfect. You could use all of these tools that we talked about in this video as an anchor whenever you feel like you're about to get sucked in, or maybe if you feel like you're sitting in it for way too long. I also find it super helpful to talk to people that you trust, whether that's your friend or your partner or a colleague or a mentor or even a therapist. If you're new here, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video, and I will see you next time.